This is better than our last turnout, which was 3. Me and my 3 closest friends. So this is good. This probably just speaks to your nature of procrastination. Because isn't your test in 2 days? So why would you come last week? That's crazy. You'll have to test till next week. Right? Wait till right to the end. That's fine. My name's Dr. Daniel Super. I co-direct the WKU Center for Literacy on the 2nd floor of this building. And your instructor, Virginia Fall, asked for our help on your behalf, I guess, maybe because some, if not many of you, are having a hard time with the test. So keep that in mind, because what this is not is a study session about psychology content. It's explicitly, right? That'd be psychology tutoring, and to be honest, I have better things to do than tutor you in psychology. Okay, we have tutors on campus for psychology. So this is not, hey, I'm going to reteach you psychology. That's not the point. Okay, the point is, we have to get to the root of the problem. That would be triage. So triage in a hospital says, hey, if you're really in trouble, we got to do something for you right now, immediately, because you're in trouble. Okay? So triage here would be just getting you ready because your test is in 2 days. The problem is, what's going to happen next test? It's going to be the same issue. What's going to happen next year? Same issue, right? Because you didn't fix the problem. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, and what it may end up sounding like to you, is I'm stepping on your toes. And at the end of the day, I don't care. Okay, so I might offend you, but I'm not really worried about offending you because I don't really care about that. So the problem with your test, most likely, is not your professor. Actually, she's an incredible instructor. Okay, is not your professor. The problem is probably how you read and study. Now, we could try to teach you to the test, which is going to sound very similar to what happened to you in all of your public education. But that'd be triage. That's not fixing the problem. Okay? So the first 15 minutes or so, and some of you have come to these before, and this is going to be a little bit of a repeat to you, but again, I don't like apologizing, so ask my wife. I don't apologize much, so I'm not going to apologize for that. But I'm going to say some things that get to the root of your problem, probably. Okay? And then I'm going to demonstrate how you should be doing them, and because you don't even have another class before the test. You can't look at me and say, well, she hasn't covered that yet, or something. No, she's covered everything. You should have read everything. So collectively, we're going to demonstrate how you should be doing it in terms of studying. Okay? So there will be some content in this, particularly 7.3, which is the part about intelligence. Okay? But I'm not going to recover everything she's already talked in class because I'm not a psychology tutor. All right? So, but if you recognize your issues, you recognize how you should be doing that, then in the next 2 days, the ample time you've left yourself to study, you can recreate this in your other chapters. So you're studying the correct way. So let's begin. The first thing is, I'll tell a quick anecdote. When I played high school basketball, my coach, he was crazy about pretty much everything. But one thing he was crazy about is he hated when people said practice makes perfect. And what do you do in high school sports? 90% of the time you practice and condition, and then, oh, by the way, you get to play some games. That's pretty much high school sports in a nutshell. Okay? And so people would say, practice makes perfect. You've heard this, right? Practice makes perfect. And my coach all made you do that. He would say, no, perfect practice makes perfect. Okay? What's the difference? You are a human being, and human beings are habitual. How many people have class in this room? How many of you sit in or very near the seat you are currently parked in right now? Exactly. Right? Go to a Baptist church and sit in somebody's pew and there will be a fight. Okay? It's like, hey, this is a assigned seat. Like, you walk into this class and someone's sitting in your seat, you're like, dude, we've been here for 10 weeks. You're sitting in my seat. Right? Because humans are habitual creatures. We do things by habit all the time. So that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. Because practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes habit. Many habits are bad. The problem with that, then, is the more you practice a bad habit, the harder it is to break the bad habit. And my guess is, with many of your secondary, middle and secondary experiences in public schools, you've developed really bad habits in terms of how you read and study. That's my guess. Why is that my guess? Because for the last 7 years, I've worked closely with students just like you, and that is overwhelmingly the most common thing that I see. Practice does not make perfect. In many of your cases, practice is why you're struggling right now. because you've done it so long. You don't know how to stop doing it. Okay? So, I'm going to approach this two ways. I'm going to first tell you, I'm going to like break you down like they do in the military and then build you back up. So I'm going to tell you the things that you're probably doing, and it's going to be rhetorical. And that means don't raise your hand and be the only one who raised your hand because you thought I was actually asking you a question. Okay? Don't do that. Okay? It's rhetorical. My guess is, I'm going to start making some statements about how you read and study. First of all, my guess is of the 30 of you in here, a lot of you have not been reading the book. That's my guess. If we really got down to it, some of you probably don't even own the book. You didn't buy it. You're like, I'll be fine with it. I'll just go to lecture. Okay? That's a problem, especially when your instructor explicitly says there are a certain number of test questions that she purposely leaves out of lecture, which means unless you intuit it or your mother bore you knowing it, the only way you're going to know it is if you read it in the book. Okay? That's one thing. The next thing is how you read is probably an issue, and that is because most of you, most of you are probably reading passively. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And what passive reading means is, hey, she told me to read it, so I'm going to be a good student and read it, so I'm going to lay on my futon and read it, and then when I'm done reading it, if I didn't fall asleep, I'll wake up or get up and go put a check mark by read the psychology chapter, and then I feel good about myself, and then I'll tell everybody I read that whole psychology chapter. But you didn't do anything with reading the psychology chapter, which means you probably shouldn't even bother to read the psychology chapter. For example, how many times in this class or others have you started reading something, and either by the time you finished reading it, or 4 minutes in, you consciously think to yourself, I have no clue what I'm reading. Like, I'm not paying attention, I have no clue what I just read. Rhetorical. At least I'm not going to point you out. It's her. She raised her hand. Okay, yeah, so that's passive reading. When you read something passively, your brain, because there's no part of your brain that's dedicated to reading, is like, hey, I'm kind of tired of this boring psychology textbook. I'm going to go back to the part of my job that I'm supposed to be doing, which is not interpreting reading, and you're not paying attention, and then you read it, but you don't get anything. Okay? That's another issue. One more issue is, my guess is, most of you are reading to pass a test, or you're studying to pass a test. Okay? You don't care about learning, you care about passing a test. That is an indictment somewhat on you, but probably a larger indictment on the way you've been schooled your entire life. Because the real world, a college education, does not care if you know the answer to something at all. That's not why someone's going to hire you. The real world cares if you know how to learn something and apply it to something else. So, a major criticism from professors all across this campus is that students struggle on the application part of what's being asked of them. Like, if I don't just ask you a direct definition and you give it back to me, if I say, hey, you need to know something to then solve this problem, you just throw up your hands like, I can't do that. You didn't tell me that in class. I didn't write that down. I'm looking at my notes right here. I didn't write that down. That's because that's not what careers want you to do. Anybody can find any information with a stroke of a key on Google. Why would they pay you $50,000 to do that? Why would your boss say, hey, I'm going to quiz you. Do you know this? And you tell me, like, all right, you're getting a paycheck this week. No. They care if you can do something. Okay? So, if that's the ultimate goal, not just remembering things, then how you go about learning it has to change. Okay? And if that's not your ultimate goal, and your ultimate goal is just to remember things, that's why you're struggling on quizzes and tests. Because quizzes and tests, papers, presentations in college are not about just telling us the facts back, because nobody cares if you know facts. A lot of people know a bunch of facts. Nobody cares. Okay? They care, can you apply what you've learned and do something with it, which should change the way you study. Another thing you're probably doing in my litany of sins is when you study, you're probably reading your notes again. Rhetorical, don't raise your hand, but ask yourself that question. When you study, and you're like, hey roommate, stop man, I'm studying. And you call your mom like, I'm studying, been studying all night or studying, I'm studying. And what you're doing when you're studying is reading your notes, right? Rhetorical, don't even shake your head. Okay. That's not studying at all. That's reading your notes. Stop doing it. Okay. Or you say, well, when I took my notes in class, they were kind of sloppy, so I'm going to study by recopying my notes. Not studying. Nope. That's called transcription, and you can pay for computer programs that do that, and then they'll do it till your license runs out. That's not studying. Or say, well, I'm going to type my notes instead of having written it, not studying. I'm going to rewrite my notes in all of the Sharpie colored pens my mom got me for my college, not studying. Okay, it's not studying. That is transcribing and rewriting. Okay, so if when you leave here until you take your test on Thursday, if your studying includes reading slides or notes from class that you copied from the board, or reading the textbook again, then you might as well not study, because that's not studying. Okay? So, if you have committed any of those various sins that I just said, or you're continuing to commit them, now let's spend the next 45 minutes or so showing you what you should be doing. Okay? Now, some of you might feel bad about yourself, but I'll just be honest with you. Think about when someone taught you how to study. Remember that lesson? Nope. Remember that lesson when someone taught you how to take notes? Nope. Because in the public school system, they basically say, hey, when you're about this tall, and you start to smell without deodorant, you just take notes in class all of a sudden. It's just like you came in 6th grade and suddenly there was stuff on the board and they expected you to write it down. Nobody taught you how to do it. And then they started testing you. Nobody taught you how to study. So what did you do? You developed your own habits to do school to the level you wanted to do school. If you wanted A's, you did what it took to get A's. If you wanted B's, you did what it took to do B's. That's what you did. The problem is, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And if you were doing any of those bad things I just said for 6, 7, 8, 9 years in public school, the game just changed, and now you're here, and now you're struggling with it because you're doing the wrong thing, and you're relying on the same thing you've always done. Okay? So, why do I even bother to point out the things you're probably doing incorrectly? Because anytime you're trying to break a behavioral habit, smoking, drinking, cursing, something that, I don't know, eating all the donuts that are on the counter and you're overweight, I don't know, whatever your problem is. When you're trying to break those habits, when it gets hard, the easiest thing to do is to go back to what's comfortable, right? When you're studying for a test and the test is coming up in 2 days and the rubber meets the road and it's time to actually do it and you have all these other assignments to do in the next 2 days, what's the easiest thing to do? Go back to what you've always done. Except for it doesn't work. You should stop doing that. Okay? So let's spend some time, and I don't want this to be just me doing this. This is not tutoring. Okay? I'm showing you how to do it. So you've all had the lectures, you've all had the reading. I want some interaction. Among the 30 of you, some people can talk. All right, and talk me through some of this stuff. So hopefully you have your books with you, because if you were to happen to go to a study session, you probably should have a book.
You say we're doing chapter 7?
7.3 is what we're going to spend the next 45 minutes on. Okay. Somebody tell me what page that is when you do 7.3.
261.
There you go, 261. Get to that while I'm making another point. For you to actually learn something, and again, this is a transition from public school, or even from private school, from middle and secondary education to college education. A huge transition happens. And that is, we no longer care if you remember things, and we only care if you've learned things. Those are hugely different concepts. If you know something or you remember something. Let me be rhetorical and critical of you one more time. If you take this test Thursday, and you say you get an 88 on it, and you're not thrilled, but that's acceptable. You got a high B, and you say, okay, that's pretty good. I'm good with that. Let's say that on Christmas Eve, your instructor comes to your house, which would be super weird, but say she did, and she gives you the same test. You getting an 88 again? How many are like, dude, I couldn't get a 48 at Christmas break? Come on, let's be honest, right? That's because you didn't learn anything. You remembered it for a test. In fact, I can watch it happen. On test days, I know when it's test days because I watch students walk up the hill. What are they doing? Reading their notes. I mean studying, right? Because that's studying, reading my notes. I'm just rereading my notes. And then they get to their class and they sit down, and what are they doing? Don't talk to me, dude. Reading my notes or studying. Okay? Then I say, clear your desk. You put it out, you're like, all right, give me that test. And then I start telling the story. If you don't give me that test now, it's leaking out my ears. You've got 5, 4, 3, give me the test. I'm losing it, right? You feel that? That's because you didn't learn anything. You didn't learn anything. You tried to remember something, okay? Remembering got you through your first part of education. Remembering does not work in college. You have to learn things. How does the human brain learn things, okay? If you structure it appropriately, you can learn things more easily. There's a process that you need to go through in reading or studying, okay? And the first thing you have to start with is a purpose. Now, I'm going to show you how to do that when we start in just a second. You have to have a purpose for when you're reading that textbook, or else you're just complying with her telling you to read it. And you don't really want to read it, and it's not terribly interesting, and you don't even like it, and you're going to be a theater major anyway, so why are you taking psychology and you're not going to learn anything, right? You got to have a purpose. When you're reading it, you can't lay on your futon, but you have to be active, which doesn't mean run in place. It means get a pen in your hand and find the answers to your purpose. I'm going to show you how to set that up in just a second, okay? In your words. This does not mean writing what somebody else put on the screen. If all you do is study the Blackboard slides or what you wrote down verbatim from the Blackboard slides, I don't know why you went to class, okay? Because that's nothing. It should be your words. Okay? There has to be more than just what you wrote down. All right? It has to make sense, and then it has to have meaning. We're going to spend time today talking about these two things. But to prove this point, and the difference between sense and meaning, somebody tell me what's the hypotenuse of this triangle? 5, yep, it's 5. It's a 3, 4, 5 triangle. Somebody tell me, what is the mathematical, geometrical formula to calculate for C? What's that called? Oh, good. Now, rhetorical. Some people were answering that. I'd say about 8 people were answering that. The others of you, you're like, dude, I don't know how to find the hypotenuse of the right triangle. Don't raise your hand. Because I'm going to point at you and be like, that guy didn't know how to do it. Okay? Did you learn the Pythagorean theorem in school? Did it have to make sense when you learned it? Of course it does. Does it make sense now? If you have a right angle and a triangle, if you know A and B, then you can find the long end by squaring A, squaring B, and then finding this square root. Does that make sense? If you didn't know the answer, it's because when you learned it didn't have meaning. Okay? This is a problem that most students never get past. If they get here, they stop here. When you study by just reading your notes, it's just making sense, and it doesn't have meaning. Meaning is how you learn. Okay? And the difference here is making sense is when something makes sense, it's consistent and it's readily comprehensible, which means you're not just blatantly, ridiculously confused. Okay? Now, you may have classes where things don't even make sense. That's a different story. But I'm guessing if you're reading the psychology textbook, you're not confused, right? You get it. You just don't do well on the test. Why? That's because you stopped right here. There's nothing confusing about an IQ test. You understand it. It's consistent. It's readily comprehensible. The reason you can't apply it is because it doesn't have meaning. It's in isolation, and you're trying to recall that isolation that you've tried to imprint in your brain by reading it 500 times before you took the test. And then you hope to God that she asks you the type of question that allows you to say exactly the only tiny little thing you know about it. And if she doesn't, you're just like, screwed. Okay? Yeah, it has to have meaning, so I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay. We need to move from receptive studying to productive studying. What does that mean? If you're engaging in receptive studying, you're just receiving information. You're looking at your notes. You're reading the chapter. You're in a study group and you're listening to somebody else talk. That's receptive studying. That's not going to form meaning. How do you form meaning? Productive studying. That means you produce something. So, you'll need paper. I'm going to show you how to do this. You'll need something to write on. You'll need your book open to page 261. I'm going to show you what it should look like to have productive study. And if not, a copy of the New Testament. Ooh, that seemed like the wrong thing to do. You can read through that. Now, productive studying means it already makes sense. Have you attended class? Have you read the chapters? Have you taken some notes? I'm assuming you've already done that. If you didn't do that, you don't need to come to a session for me to explain, do something, class dismissed, right? That'd be the whole class. You come in, I'm like, hey, get a snack. Oh, it's 4 o'clock. Hey, stop being lazy and do your work. Okay, it's over. It's 4 o'clock in 8 seconds, right? I'm assuming you've already done your work. Otherwise, you don't need my help to tell you to do your work. Okay? So say you've done your work. You've read, you've taken notes, you've attended class, you've taken notes, you've done what you need to do to be ready. That's making sense. It's readily comprehensible. Now you have to make it have meaning, which means it can no longer be receptive, it has to be productive. You have to produce something. So what should it look like? Go to page 261, and I'm going to show you in this textbook. This is a great textbook. Honestly, most textbooks are no good, but this one's pretty good. Because it sets it up for you perfectly. So we are, as an example, together going to do 7.3. And then you're going to have probably 4 or 5 other modules you'll be responsible for the test that you should be able to replicate this when you're studying. All right? So 7.3 is about intelligence. And it gives you bullet points 10, 11, 12, and 13 in that blue ribbon. See that at the top? And it says, here are the things that you should be able to do when you're finished with this module so that you can show yourself and others you understand what the heck you're talking about. Okay? You should be able to define intelligence, identify the different tests of intelligence, evaluate characteristics of a good test of intelligence, evaluate gender differences, blah, blah, blah. You can read it. Okay? So, we're moving from receptive to productive. What should you do? I do this on separate sheets of paper. If you can't afford that many sheets of paper, then I could give you like 70 cents and you can buy another notebook. Or you could come to the center, I'll just give you a notebook, right? So, or you could conserve sheets and try to squeeze it all in on 2 sheets. But my suggestion would be use different sheets of paper, okay? So the first thing you will need to know before you even start studying is you need to say, I need to be able to define intelligence and some of these other things. So I'm going to write, and this is what you should do, history. This is background, foundational stuff of intelligence. That's an entire sheet, okay? We're going to come back and fill that out in a second. Another entire sheet is identify the good tests of intelligence. Good IQ tests. That's a separate sheet. The next thing, evaluate gender differences in cognitive abilities. Next, somebody tell me. I don't want to carry this book around. Extremes and misuse. Next, theories. And finally, anything else? Nature, nurture. Or isn't this convenient that I use a whole board? Okay. This is what you should do. Now, you're producing something. Let's talk about why this works. Because when it's somebody else's stuff, you don't learn it. It only makes sense. Actually, it's not only counterproductive because you fail to learn it, it's counterproductive because you can convince yourself you know it better than you do. Have you failed a quiz or test or done not as well as you had hoped? And if you look back at when you were studying, you told yourself you had it. And then you go fail it. And you're like, man, I thought I had it. Why? Because if it only makes sense, and it's somebody else's stuff, it's easy for things to make sense. It's hard for them to have meaning. Okay? So, the example I always give to illustrate this is if you are not the driver on a trip to some location that's kind of complicated to get to wherever you're going. But you are in the car. But you weren't responsible for navigating the 4,000 pounds of steel at 75 miles an hour so as to not kill everybody involved and actually get there efficiently. You didn't pay attention to what was happening. What did you do? Complained about the music or slept. That's what my wife does. I'm like, hey, wake up. I'm here, talking to you, do something, you're killing me. Okay? However, if you were the driver and you had to pay attention because you were responsible, if you have to go back to that location in 6 months, can you get back? The answer is yes, because you drove. If you're the passenger and you go there again in 6 months and someone says, you should drive because you've been there before, can you get there? You're like, dude, I've been there, but I have no clue how to get there. You have to get out Siri or whatever, tell your phone to tell you, because you have no clue. Okay? You only studying somebody else's stuff, the notes she puts on the board, somebody else's publication in a textbook. You only studying that is being the passenger. And when the test comes, you don't know how to do it because it wasn't your stuff. You weren't responsible. By making it productive, that's receptive. By making it productive, you're the driver. It's your stuff. And then you will do well on the test. I promise, do this. I guarantee you will do better on the test. Or at least the sections you do this. So, now let's go linearly through the book. This is where I need your input. This first section that I'm labeling history because it's what is intelligence, how is it measured. Oh, that's it. Okay? These two sections. Your book already sets this up for you perfectly. What do you need to know? Hopefully your book's already written in, or you already have your notes, or you already lectured. I don't know. You know something about this already because you've been in class. I'm not going to reteach it to you. Tell me what we need to know in this section. Somebody.
Definition.
Yeah, tell me what is the definition of intelligence. Do not read me the definition. Why? Because reading me the definition is somebody else's stuff. You tell me what is the definition of intelligence. Not your opinion, but your words. Here's where I wish I could make that cricket noise, because I'd make the cricket noise. Anybody? Definition of intelligence.
The ability to acquire knowledge.
Okay. All right. So, I'm not going to write this on the board because it's going to take me too long and it's very sloppy. What would you do? Write down in your words. You copy down the definition, not your stuff. Your understanding of it, your stuff. Okay? Write down the definition of intelligence. Next, how is intelligence measured? Somebody, what do we need to know from this section? Thank you. What is mental age?
Is their age based upon how they perform?
Okay, good. How do we measure intelligence then?
IQ test.
Okay, IQ test. How historically have we measured it? Using mental age. Mental age, or chronologic age times 100. Okay? Now, historically, who do we need to know about in this section? Benet. Tell me, why do we need to know about Benet? Okay, good. I'm not going to write all this down. We're doing this collectively. You should be writing this down. Benet. Tell me again. Okay. Who else do we need to know about? Wechsler. What do we know about Wechsler that is important? Two big things. David Wechsler created a series of IQ tests. This is for kids. This is for adults. These W's stand for guess what? Wechsler, very good. Right? Okay, so these are his tests. What is monumentally important about Wechsler's test?
Is that like an average that you could see if someone deviates from the regular?
Good. He found a way to compare your intelligence to other people your age. So it's relative, instead of just mental and chronologic age within yourself. So not just within yourself, but between others. Okay. What else do we need to know about Wechsler? How pervasively used are these tests today? Anybody? Yeah, most commonly used tests in at least North America, United States and Canada. Wexler. Okay. Anything else we need to know from these first two sections? You should be writing these down in the way you understand them and the way you're going to remember them. Let's move to the next. Probably another sheet of paper. What makes a good IQ test? Conveniently, they made it in blue in your book.
If it's standardized.
Standard, what does that mean?
That you're sat down in a controlled area and you're doing it.
So it's controlled? Yeah. What else does it mean?
It's legitimate, like it's not just something you take on the internet, it's like something that's given to you by.
If it's flashing bananas and oranges and it takes 2 minutes, that's not a real IQ test. Probably takes like an hour and a half and a trained psychologist has to do it. Probably costs a lot of money if you pay for it. Okay, it's controlled. What else does it mean?
Just say, or it's like different depending on your environment, like one in France would have to be something that a French kid would understand.
Okay, so the way, you're talking about norms.
Yeah.
The way they norm it, they compare it to people you should be compared to, right? Because it's this whole idea of Wexler saying, hey, we're going to stop doing this and we're going to start comparing it to people your age. It's got to be compared to a large group of people who it's used on who are similar to. Okay. Anything else? Standardization. See this chart?
Okay.
What's the average IQ? 100. What is the standard deviation of an IQ? 15, right? So this is what they call a bell curve, or so it is not until you cross the threshold of a standard deviation that you can say statistically you're smarter than someone else in terms of IQ, right? So if I have 111 IQ and you have 112, who's smarter? We're the same, right? But if I have 111 IQ and you have 118 IQ, who's smarter? This person, because you cross that line. Okay? So, standardized IQ tests will be normally distributed, and they will be able to be interpreted by this type of scale. Average is 100. Okay? What else do we need to know about good IQ tests? The first thing is they're standardized. That's what that means. What's the next thing? Say it again. Reliable. What does reliable mean?
Is that it's given by an actual like professor or a doctor or
That's probably more about standard. Say it again. The results it yields are consistent. Think about what the word reliable means. If you were to describe your friend as reliable, what would that mean? You can count on that friend, right? If your truck was reliable, it starts every single time, right? What I just did is show you how to take something from making sense to having meaning. Okay? You thought of another connection of how you know that word and what that word means and how it could be applied to how we're using it here. That's meaning. If we just said, hey, reliable means refers to the consistency of test scores over time. And then you made a flashcard that says reliable. And on the other side it says refers to the consistency of test scores over time. And you're like, hey roommate, reliable. And you're like, refers to the consistency of test scores over time. Got it. No, that's sense. That makes sense. It's consistent. You didn't misinterpret it. It's readily comprehensible. You understood it. It's just that it didn't mean anything. Okay? If you can find a way to connect it to something else you already know in the context of what makes a good IQ test, reliable means, hey, you can count on it. Now you're going to know on the test what reliable is because you made it have meaning. It didn't just make sense. Okay? What's the next thing? Standardized, reliable.
Validity.
It is valid. What does valid mean? It does what it's supposed to do. Okay? Which would be what? It's not going to tell you how many puppies you'll have when you're 42. That'd be weird. It's going to measure your IQ. It actually does what it says it's going to do. That's what a good IQ test is. Standardized, it was normed on a population. It's the same in a controlled environment every single time. Can't be deviated from. There's a standard practice, and it follows it. Okay? Once you've delivered it, and you get the results, can you count on them? And are they actually going to measure IQ? Doesn't that all make sense? Not confusing, is it? But you have to find a way for it to have meaning. Now, let's talk just a little bit about extremes, because extremes also have a category of misuse. And this category is, unless I'm mistaken, is in this same section. Tell me about ways we can misuse intelligence tests. It's right there in your book.
It's a good way to label people, like if you take an IQ test and you put it out there, labeling.
Good. How could that be a problem?
Because if, say, Bobby Joe has a lower score and Susie has a higher score, Susie can like then label him and be like, he's dumb.
Good. Okay. Labeling. Our perception of our own abilities is a lot to do with how successful we are. Right? If you think you can do it, you probably can. If you think you can't do it, you probably can't. Okay? So if we misuse an intelligence test and say, hey, we did this, we trust it, it says it measures what it measures, but you're big dummy. That person's going to be likely to be successful in their life? Probably not. That's not an appropriate way to use an intelligence test, right? Conversely, do you know what the valedictorian dropout rate is in colleges across the country? The same as everybody else. The best people in your high school drop out of college without graduating the same rate as everybody else. Why? Could be because they have an overinflated view of their abilities. They don't make any adjustments and changes, much like we've been talking about today, and they just fail out because they think they can do it. But it requires change. All right? What's another way that you could misuse? It's in bold in the book, which is quite unique. Cultural insensitivities. What would that look like? What's a cultural insensitivity? Or a culturally unfair test? Anybody? Did she lecture on this? You have notes on this? Did you read this? Anybody? Okay, we will move on and you can fill in that blank later. Like I said, my point is not to teach you psychology. So let's move on. Gender issues. Specifically gender differences in IQ tests, because what's 7.3 all about? Intelligence. So are there gender differences in intelligence? Anybody?
I mean, like the different, like boys are more likely to have dyslexia than girls.
Okay, well, it says in the book, it even puts it in bold in the book, which means we should probably know it, so I agree with you. So, dyslexia is more prominent in
Boys.
males, yeah, boys.
Boys.
Okay, what else do we know? What else do we know about gender differences?
Colorblindness is also more likely in males.
Okay, so